The rain had ceased only an hour before the carriages began arriving at Hawthorne Hall, yet the cobbled streets still shimmered beneath the glow of lantern light, reflecting 100 fractured stars beneath the wheels of England's nobility. Inside the vast assembly hall, crystal chandeliers blazed like captive constellations, scattering gold across polished marble floors. Silk gowns swept through the corridors in waves of emerald, sapphire, and ivory, while the low murmur of aristocratic conversation rose and fell like the tide. Tonight was no ordinary gathering. Tonight, the kingdom's most eligible nobleman, Duke Sebastian Hawthorne, would attend the annual bride selection, an event where ambitious mothers displayed their daughters like precious jewels before the eyes of society. Among the glittering guests sat a young woman who seemed painfully out of place. Miss Eleanor Ashford lowered her gaze as another cluster of ladies drifted past her, their laughter sharp enough to wound. Her gown had once been blue, though years of wear had faded it into a pale shadow of its former color. Tiny stitches lined the sleeves where she had repaired the fabric herself by candlelight. Though her dress lacked the splendor of those surrounding her, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her back straight despite the weight of countless humiliations. Strands of chestnut hair framed a face marked not by cosmetics or jewels but by gentleness. There was a softness in her expression that hardship had failed to erase. Unfortunately, kindness was rarely valued in rooms such as these. At the opposite side of the dressing chamber, her stepsisters attracted attention with effortless ease. Beatrice Ashford wore crimson satin that gleamed beneath the lamps, while Vivian dazzled in lavender silk adorned with pearls. Both possessed the polished confidence of women who had never known deprivation. As they admired themselves before a mirror, they watched Eleanor through their reflection with thinly veiled contempt. "Do try not to embarrass us this evening," Beatrice remarked lightly. Vivian smiled. "Though perhaps embarrassment is the only thing our dear sister can reliably accomplish." The words drew laughter from nearby ladies. Eleanor remained silent. Years earlier she might have defended herself. Time had taught her the futility of battling cruelty that society willingly applauded. Since her father's death, every inheritance intended for her had quietly vanished into the hands of her stepmother. Every opportunity had been reserved for her sisters. She had become a servant within her own home, tolerated rather than loved. Yet despite everything she had come tonight. Not because she dreamed of marrying a duke. Because some stubborn corner of her heart refused to surrender entirely. As preparations continued, servants hurried between chambers carrying perfumes, ribbons, and jewelry. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Beyond the doors, musicians tuned their instruments while guests gathered in expectation of Duke Hawthorne's arrival. Beatrice suddenly lifted a decorative bottle from a nearby vanity. "What is that fragrance?" Vivian asked. "Imported jasmine oil," Beatrice replied. "Rather expensive." A mischievous look passed between them. Eleanor noticed too late. The bottle tipped. A stream of heated scented oil cascaded across her exposed shoulder and collarbone. Pain exploded through her skin. A cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. The glass bottle struck the floor and shattered. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then came the laughter. Eleanor staggered backward as the oil soaked into the front of her gown, leaving a dark stain across the faded fabric. Angry redness bloomed along her skin. Tears burned behind her eyes, but the humiliation hurt far more than the injury itself. "Oh heavens!" Vivian exclaimed with theatrical concern. "What an unfortunate accident." "Tragic," Beatrice agreed. Several young ladies exchanged smirks. Others pretended not to notice. No one offered help. The cruelty spread quickly through the ballroom once guests learned what had happened. Whispers multiplied with astonishing speed. The poor relation. The unwanted daughter. The girl foolish enough to attend. Every glance became another judgment. Every smile concealed amusement. Eleanor felt herself shrinking beneath the weight of their attention. The hall that had seemed magnificent upon arrival now felt suffocating. The chandeliers above appeared less like stars and more like countless eyes watching her disgrace unfold. Then the grand doors opened. Conversation ceased instantly. Duke Sebastian Hawthorne entered. Tall and imposing, he moved through the ballroom with calm authority. Black evening attire accentuated his broad frame, while years of disciplined restraint sharpened every feature of his face. He was not merely admired. He was respected, feared, and endlessly discussed. Mothers dreamed of securing his favor. Daughters rehearsed smiles in hopes of capturing his attention. Yet Sebastian scarcely acknowledged any of them. As he crossed the room, fragments of gossip reached him. A ruined gown. A humiliating accident. A girl making a spectacle of herself. His expression remained unreadable. Across the ballroom, Eleanor felt the scrutiny becoming unbearable. Fighting tears, she turned away from the crowd. Her shoulder throbbed beneath the burn. Her dignity, fragile as glass, seemed moments from shattering entirely. Without looking back, she slipped through a side doorway and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Several guests chuckled as she fled. Others resumed their conversations. The entertainment, it seemed, was over. But Sebastian Hawthorne had not resumed walking. Instead, he stood motionless near the center of the ballroom, his gaze fixed upon the doorway through which Eleanor had vanished. An uneasy silence settled among those nearest him. Then, in a voice low enough to command attention yet quiet enough to unsettle everyone listening, he asked a single question. "Who," the Duke said, "is the young lady everyone seems so eager to destroy?" By dawn the following morning, the humiliation at Hawthorne Hall had become the favorite entertainment of London society. The story traveled through drawing rooms, breakfast parlors, and fashionable promenades with astonishing speed. Some claimed Miss Eleanor Ashford had stumbled clumsily into a table. Others insisted she had burst into tears before half the aristocracy. With every retelling, the truth diminished while the mockery grew. Society possessed a peculiar appetite for misfortune, especially when it belonged to someone powerless enough to endure it quietly. Eleanor remained inside her small attic chamber while rain tapped softly against the window panes. The burn along her shoulder had darkened into an angry crimson mark. Each movement brought discomfort, yet the physical pain scarcely compared to the memory of laughter echoing through the ballroom. She sat beside a narrow window with a needle resting idle in her lap, staring at rooftops veiled beneath silver mist. For years she had taught herself not to expect kindness. Expectations, she had learned, were dangerous things. They shattered too easily. Downstairs, the voices of Beatrice and Vivian drifted through the house like unwelcome music. Their excitement had not diminished since returning from the bride selection. "The Duke barely looked at anyone else," Beatrice declared. Vivian laughed. "He certainly looked at Eleanor's disgrace." Both women dissolved into amusement. Eleanor lowered her eyes. Ordinarily such cruelty would have pierced her heart. Today it merely exhausted her. She no longer possessed the strength to defend herself against people determined to misunderstand her. A knock interrupted the morning. Moments later, a servant appeared outside her chamber carrying an elegant parcel wrapped in cream-colored paper and tied with silver ribbon. "It arrived for you, miss," he said. "For me?" The servant nodded and withdrew. Confusion flickered across Eleanor's face. No one sent her gifts. No one thought of her at all. Carefully she untied the ribbon. Inside rested a porcelain jar embossed with a royal physician's seal. Beneath it lay a bouquet of pristine white roses, their petals luminous against the muted room. A faint fragrance rose from them, fresh and delicate as morning dew. Tucked among the stems was a folded card. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened it. Only one sentence appeared upon the page. "No stain upon a gown can diminish true grace." She read the words once. Then again. Something unfamiliar stirred within her chest. Not joy. Not yet. Perhaps the fragile beginning of hope. The note bore no signature, but she sensed instinctively that it had not come from an ordinary admirer. The handwriting possessed confidence without vanity, elegance without ornament. Whoever had written those words had observed her humiliation and chosen compassion instead of amusement. For the remainder of the day, she found herself returning repeatedly to the card. The message should have been insignificant. Yet it lingered. That evening another surprise arrived. A formal invitation embossed with the Hawthorne crest. Eleanor stared at it in disbelief. The Duke of Hawthorne requested her presence at a private royal garden reception 3 days hence. Her breath caught. Across the house, outrage erupted almost immediately. Beatrice seized the invitation from the dining table. "This must be a mistake." Vivian examined the seal. "It cannot possibly be meant for her." Their mother frowned deeply. "Perhaps the Duke wishes to offer charity." The suggestion carried enough venom to sour the air. Eleanor said nothing. Nevertheless, her pulse quickened. The invitation remained genuine. For reasons she could not understand, Duke Sebastian Hawthorne had requested her attendance. News spread rapidly through society. By the following afternoon, whispers followed Sebastian wherever he appeared. Noblewomen who had spent years pursuing his attention found themselves discussing only one subject. Why Eleanor Ashford? What hidden quality had captured his interest? Some suspected pity. Others suspected rebellion. A few suspected something far more dangerous. At the appointed hour, Eleanor arrived at the royal gardens beneath a pale spring sky. Gravel pathways wound through endless displays of roses, lilies, and lavender. Marble fountains sparkled beneath sunlight. Guests wandered between flowering arches while musicians performed softly near the terraces. Eleanor felt conspicuously plain among them. Then she saw him. Sebastian stood beside a stone balustrade overlooking a reflecting pool. The surrounding crowd seemed to fade around him. When he noticed her approach, he inclined his head respectfully. "Miss Ashford." His voice carried the calm steadiness of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Your Grace," she replied. For a brief moment neither spoke. Then Sebastian surprised her. "You appear to be healing." Instinctively her fingers touched her shoulder. The ointment helped greatly. A faint expression crossed his face. Not satisfaction. Relief. "You should not have suffered that injury at all." The simple statement unsettled her more than any grand compliment could have done. Most people dismissed pain. Sebastian acknowledged it. As guests circulated around them, he continued speaking with remarkable ease. He did not ask about beauty, fashion, or marriage prospects. Instead he asked what books she enjoyed, which landscapes inspired her, whether she preferred city streets or countryside mornings. No one had ever seemed interested in such things before. Gradually her nervousness eased. She discovered that Sebastian listened carefully, as though every answer genuinely mattered. Hours passed unnoticed. For the first time in years, Eleanor found herself laughing softly. The sound surprised even her. Across the gardens, Beatrice watched the interaction with mounting fury. Vivian appeared equally disturbed. Neither sister could comprehend what was unfolding. The Duke was not merely being polite. He was captivated. As twilight settled across the gardens, servants illuminated lanterns among the flowering paths. Golden light shimmered upon leaves and petals, transforming the grounds into something almost enchanted. Sebastian paused before Eleanor departed. "There is something else." From a nearby attendant he accepted a small parcel bound in navy ribbon. Eleanor hesitated. "Your Grace, this is unnecessary." "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but I wish to give it regardless." Inside rested an antique volume of poetry bound in blue leather. Nestled between its pages lay a single pressed forget-me-not. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Yet something passed between them in that silence, delicate and dangerous. Across the garden, conversations had already ceased. Dozens of aristocratic observers watched openly now. And when Sebastian Hawthorne calmly extended his arm toward Eleanor before all of society, the shocked stillness that followed felt less like gossip beginning and more like the first tremor before a storm. The days following the garden reception unfolded with the quiet inevitability of a tide advancing toward shore. Society remained consumed by speculation, yet neither gossip nor criticism prevented Duke Sebastian Hawthorne from seeking Eleanor Ashford's company. Invitations arrived with increasing frequency, each bearing the unmistakable Hawthorne crest. Some requested her presence at charitable gatherings. Others invited her to private literary discussions hosted within the Duke's estate. Every acceptance deepened the mystery that fascinated London and infuriated those who believed rank should determine affection. Eleanor understood the danger. Each public appearance beside Sebastian sharpened society's scrutiny. Yet she found herself unable to refuse. There was a peace in his presence that felt entirely unfamiliar. One afternoon, beneath a sky washed pale by drifting clouds, Sebastian escorted her through the glass conservatory attached to Hawthorne Manor. Sunlight filtered through enormous panes overhead, casting shifting patterns across marble pathways lined with exotic orchids and climbing roses. Warm air carried the fragrance of jasmine and earth. For several minutes they walked in companionable silence. The stillness felt comfortable rather than awkward. At length Sebastian glanced toward her. "You seem troubled today." Eleanor offered a small smile. "Do I?" "You do." The certainty in his voice made denial impossible. She lowered her gaze to a cluster of white lilies blooming beside the path. "I sometimes wonder whether I belong anywhere at all." The confession emerged more easily than expected. Perhaps because he never demanded vulnerability. He simply created space for it. "My father once made every room feel like home," she continued softly. "After he died, everything changed. The house remained the same, yet somehow I became a stranger within it." Sebastian listened without interruption. "The servants stopped calling me Miss Ashford. My stepmother stopped speaking of my future. Even the portraits seemed to watch me differently." A faint sadness touched her expression. "It is remarkable how invisible one can become while standing in plain sight." Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The words struck something within him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried unusual gravity. "I understand more than you realize." Eleanor looked up. For the first time since they had met, the Duke seemed less like an untouchable nobleman and more like a man carrying burdens carefully concealed from the world. "My father valued perfection above affection," Sebastian said quietly. "Every achievement merely produced higher expectations. Every mistake became a lesson in disappointment." The conservatory suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. "When I was 12, I spent 3 days recovering from a riding accident." A bitter smile crossed his face. "The first thing he asked was whether I had damaged the horse." Eleanor stared. The revelation startled her. She had always imagined powerful men untouched by loneliness. Instead she recognized a familiar wound, not identical to her own, yet painfully similar. Neither had been cherished as they deserved. The realization settled between them with profound gentleness. As the afternoon progressed, conversation flowed naturally. They spoke of poetry, music, childhood dreams, and distant places they wished to see. Their words wandered beyond formal pleasantries into something far more dangerous: understanding. Several times their hands brushed while turning pages of a book Sebastian carried beneath his arm. Each accidental touch lingered in memory long afterward. Neither acknowledged it. Neither needed to. Outside the conservatory, however, darker currents were gathering. Beatrice and Vivian had watched the Duke's growing attachment with mounting desperation. What began as jealousy had evolved into obsession. They could not tolerate Eleanor's assent. Every smile she received felt like a personal theft. One evening, hidden within a candlelit sitting room, they devised a scheme. If society admired Eleanor's character, then her character would become the target. Over the following days, forged letters began circulating among influential households. Written in elegant script, they portrayed Eleanor as calculating and ambitious. The fabricated correspondence suggested she had deliberately manipulated Sebastian's affections to secure wealth and status. The accusation spread quickly. Too quickly. Within a week, whispers followed Eleanor wherever she went. At first she noticed only subtle changes. Conversations ceased when she approached. Smiles disappeared. Invitations quietly vanished. Then came the confrontation. A distinguished gathering had assembled within Lady Pembroke's ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished floors while musicians performed a gentle waltz. Eleanor entered unaware of the storm awaiting her. The moment she crossed the threshold, silence rippled through the room. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some curious, others openly condemning. Lady Pembroke approached carrying several folded letters. "Miss Ashford," she said coldly, "perhaps you would care to explain these." Confusion flickered across Eleanor's face. The letters were thrust into her hands. She scanned the pages. Her blood turned cold. The words were monstrous, manipulative, cruel, nothing resembling her true thoughts. "I did not write these," she whispered. Yet even as she spoke, disbelief surrounded her. A murmur swept through the crowd. The damage was already unfolding. Eleanor's throat tightened. The familiar sensation returned. Humiliation. Exposure. The helpless certainty that no one intended to listen. Unable to endure another moment, she turned and fled the ballroom. Moonlight silvered the garden outside. Cool air struck her face as she hurried along a gravel path bordered by roses. Tears blurred her vision. Every step echoed memories she had struggled to escape. The laughter at the bride's selection. The years of ridicule. The endless assumptions. Perhaps society had been correct all along. Perhaps she would never be allowed to become anything more than their chosen target. Footsteps sounded behind her. She stopped. Sebastian emerged from the shadows. Concern immediately darkened his expression. "Eleanor." The simple way he spoke her name nearly shattered her composure. "They believe it," she said. Her voice trembled. "They looked at those letters and believed every word." Sebastian closed the distance between them. "I do not." She stared at him. The certainty in his gaze was unwavering. He reached into his coat and withdrew one of the forged pages, then calmly tore it in half. "The world sees your scars and calls them flaws," he said. "I see your endurance and call it strength." The words settled deep within her heart. For the first time since the accusations began, she felt the crushing weight of shame begin to loosen. Not disappear, but weaken. Hope returned cautiously, like sunlight emerging after a storm. Yet even as that fragile warmth spread through her chest, a messenger approached from the manor carrying an official document sealed with royal insignia. The servant bowed before Sebastian. "Your Grace." Sebastian accepted the letter. His expression hardened as he broke the seal and read its contents. Eleanor watched the color leave his face. A long silence followed. Then he lowered the document. "The matter has reached the crown," he said quietly. And suddenly the scandal threatening Eleanor's future no longer belonged to society alone. The royal summons transformed a private scandal into a matter of national interest. Within days, every aristocratic household in London spoke of little else. The forged letters attributed to Eleanor Ashford had traveled far beyond drawing rooms and ballrooms, eventually reaching officials close to the crown. What had begun as whispered suspicion now threatened to become official disgrace. For Eleanor, the danger was no longer social embarrassment. If the accusations were accepted as truth, she would forever be remembered as a scheming opportunist who had manipulated one of the kingdom's most powerful men. The weight of that possibility settled heavily upon her. Yet Sebastian Hawthorne refused to retreat. While advisors urged caution and acquaintances suggested distance, he continued appearing beside her whenever society gathered. His loyalty only intensified public fascination. Some admired his steadfastness. Others questioned his judgment. The cruelest voices claimed Eleanor had enchanted him beyond reason. One rainy afternoon, Sebastian stood before a roaring fireplace in his study while royal investigators reviewed the accusations. Sheets of correspondence covered an enormous mahogany table. Every forged letter had been collected and examined. A gray-haired investigator adjusted his spectacles. "The handwriting is convincing." "It is false," Sebastian replied. "We are not questioning your conviction, Your Grace." "Then question the evidence." The investigator exchanged glances with his colleagues. Sebastian's patience was thinning. 4 years he had navigated political disputes, financial negotiations, and social intrigues with measured restraint. Yet Eleanor's suffering awakened something far less controlled. Every insult directed toward her felt intolerable. He understood why. The world had spent years overlooking her kindness while magnifying every vulnerability. He had no intention of allowing it to happen again. Meanwhile, Eleanor endured her own battle. At Ashford House, invitations ceased arriving altogether. Former acquaintances crossed streets to avoid conversation. Ladies who once offered polite smiles now regarded her with open suspicion. Even servants seemed uncertain how to address her. The isolation reopened wounds she thought had begun to heal. One evening she stood before her bedroom mirror studying her reflection. The faint scar left by the hot oil remained visible upon her shoulder. For a moment she traced it gently. The mark reminded her of humiliation, yet it also reminded her of survival. She had endured cruelty before. She would endure this as well. A knock sounded at her door. A servant entered carrying a sealed note. Eleanor immediately recognized Sebastian's handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sentence. "Hold fast. Truth requires patience, but it never fears scrutiny." The words steadied her. Not because they promised victory. Because they promised faith. Someone believed her completely. For perhaps the first time in her life, that belief mattered more than public approval. Days later, a breakthrough emerged. A young maid employed at Ashford House requested an audience with royal investigators. Frightened yet determined, she revealed information she had concealed for weeks. She had witnessed Beatrice and Vivian drafting letters late at night. She had seen discarded practice pages hidden within the fireplace ashes. The testimony changed everything. Investigators immediately began searching for additional proof. They found it quickly. Fragments of matching handwriting. Destroyed drafts. Ink samples identical to those used in the forged correspondence. Piece by piece the deception unraveled. When news reached Sebastian, relief washed across him, though it was swiftly replaced by anger. Not anger for himself. Anger for Eleanor. The truth had existed all along. Yet society had chosen suspicion before evidence. A grand royal ball had already been scheduled for the end of the season, and now it became the stage upon which judgment would be delivered. Nobles arrived from every corner of the kingdom. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead like captured galaxies. Thousands of candles illuminated sweeping staircases and gilded balconies. Silk gowns shimmered beneath golden light. Military officers, diplomats, aristocrats, and royal officials filled the magnificent hall. The atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. Everyone knew revelations were coming. Everyone waited. Eleanor entered alone. The vast ballroom seemed larger than ever. Conversations softened as guests noticed her arrival. Months earlier such attention would have terrified her. Tonight she walked forward with quiet composure. Pain had changed her. So had hope. Across the room, Sebastian watched her descend the staircase. For a brief moment, the crowd disappeared. He saw only the woman who had faced ridicule without surrendering her dignity. The woman who had taught him that gentleness could possess extraordinary strength. Royal officials soon took their places near the center of the ballroom. Silence gradually spread. The chief investigator stepped forward. His voice carried clearly through the hall. The findings were presented with meticulous precision. Witness testimony, recovered drafts, physical evidence. Every detail pointed toward the same conclusion. The letters had been forged. Eleanor Ashford had been innocent from the beginning. A collective gasp swept through the room. Faces turned toward Beatrice and Vivian. Shock quickly became condemnation. The sisters stood frozen beneath the crushing weight of exposure. Their confidence evaporated as murmurs intensified around them. For the first time in years, they experienced the judgment they had so freely inflicted upon another. Eleanor felt no triumph, only profound relief. The burden she had carried for weeks finally lifted. Yet the evening was not finished. Before the whispers could regain momentum, Sebastian moved. Without hesitation, he crossed the ballroom. Every guest watched. Every conversation ceased. The distance between him and Eleanor seemed to stretch endlessly. Then he reached her. For one suspended moment, neither spoke. The silence itself became powerful. Slowly, deliberately, Sebastian took her hand. The gesture was simple. Its meaning was not. Gasps echoed through the hall. No nobleman of his standing would publicly align himself with a disgraced woman. Yet he did so after her vindication, not before it. Not because society approved, because he chose to. His voice carried across the ballroom. A woman's worth is not measured by the cruelty she survives, he declared, but by the grace with which she rises above it. The words settled over the gathering like a bell's final note. Many lowered their eyes. Others appeared genuinely ashamed. Eleanor's breath caught. For years she had longed for someone to see beyond the rumors, beyond the insults, beyond the limitations others imposed upon her. Sebastian always had. Emotion shimmered within her eyes. The room around them faded. There remained only the warmth of his hand and the certainty in his gaze. Then, before anyone could recover from the declaration, Sebastian reached into the inner pocket of his coat. The movement drew immediate attention. A small velvet box emerged. The entire ballroom froze. And as he slowly opened it beneath the blaze of 1,000 candles, Eleanor realized with sudden astonishment that whatever happened next would change both of their lives forever. For several suspended heartbeats, no one in the ballroom seemed capable of breathing. The velvet box remained open in Duke Sebastian Hawthorne's hand, reflecting the glow of 1,000 candles. Society expected diamonds. They expected a ring worthy of headlines and admiration. Instead, confusion rippled across the gathering as they realized no jewel rested inside. Within the box lay a folded document secured with a crimson ribbon. Eleanor stared at it, bewildered. Sebastian's gaze never left her face. "Miss Ashford," he said softly, though every person in the ballroom strained to hear, "before I ask for your future, there is something that belongs to your past." A tremor passed through her. He carefully removed the document and placed it in her hands. The seal was familiar, painfully familiar. For a moment she simply stared. Then her eyes widened. The ballroom disappeared around her. The music vanished. Even the candles seemed to fade. Only the document remained. Ashford estate. Her father's estate. The home where she had spent the happiest years of her childhood. The inheritance that had mysteriously vanished after his death. The property she had mourned almost as deeply as she mourned him. Her hands trembled violently. This cannot be possible." "It is," Sebastian replied. His voice carried quiet certainty. "I spent weeks investigating your father's affairs after learning how much had been taken from you. The transfer of ownership was achieved through deception and manipulation. The courts have reviewed the evidence. As of this morning, Ashford Estate has been legally restored to its rightful owner." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Eleanor could barely hear it. Tears blurred the elegant handwriting before her eyes. Memories flooded back with overwhelming force. Her father's laughter echoing through sunlit hallways. Afternoons spent reading beside garden fountains. The feeling of belonging. The feeling of being loved. Things she had believed lost forever. For years she had survived humiliation after humiliation. People assumed she desired wealth, status, a title. Yet Sebastian had understood something deeper. He had given her neither charity nor luxury. He had given her justice. The realization shattered the final walls around her heart. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. Across the ballroom, Beatrice and Vivian watched in horrified disbelief. Their faces had gone pale. Everything they had stolen, everything they had fought to keep, gone. Their downfall was now complete. But Sebastian scarcely acknowledged them. They were no longer important. Only Eleanor mattered. Slowly he stepped closer. The room remained utterly silent. Every aristocrat present sensed history unfolding before them. For perhaps the first time in years, society itself seemed humbled. Not by power, by truth. Sebastian reached for Eleanor's trembling hand. His expression softened. The proud, reserved duke who intimidated ministers and noblemen alike seemed transformed. Vulnerability flickered openly across his features. "I once believed strength meant standing alone," he said. His voice carried throughout the hall. "My father taught me that affection was weakness and trust was dangerous. For many years I accepted that lesson." Eleanor listened through tears. "But then I met a woman who endured cruelty without becoming cruel. A woman who faced humiliation without surrendering her dignity. A woman who continued showing kindness long after the world had ceased showing kindness to her." Emotion tightened his voice. "A woman who changed me." The crowd remained motionless. No one dared interrupt. Sebastian released a slow breath. Then, before the entire kingdom's elite, he lowered himself onto one knee. Shock exploded through the ballroom. Several ladies covered their mouths. Others stared openly. No one could remember ever witnessing a duke kneel publicly. Yet Sebastian did so without hesitation. Not because tradition required it, because his heart demanded it. Eleanor's breath caught. The sight felt almost unreal. The powerful man before her could command fortunes, influence governments, and shape society itself. Yet at this moment he offered not authority. He offered devotion. "I do not offer rescue, Miss Ashford," he said. His eyes never left hers. "You rescued yourself long ago through courage I can scarcely comprehend." His voice grew gentler. "I do not offer charity because you deserve none. Charity is given where worth is absent, and your worth has never been in question." A tear escaped Eleanor's eye. Sebastian smiled faintly. "I offer partnership." The words settled over the room like a blessing. "I offer loyalty." Another heartbeat passed. "I offer every sunrise and every hardship, every victory and every sorrow shared equally." The silence became almost sacred. Then came the question. "Will you allow me the honor of walking beside you for the remainder of my days?" Eleanor could not immediately answer. Too many memories filled her mind. The hot oil burning her skin. The laughter. The whispers. The loneliness. Years spent believing she was unwanted. Years spent shrinking herself to survive. And then Sebastian. The roses. The poetry. The unwavering faith. The way he had seen value in her long before society did. Most importantly, the way he had never tried to change who she was. He had simply loved her. Fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. But these tears felt different. Not born of pain. Born of healing. Slowly she squeezed his hand. A radiant smile emerged through her emotion. Yes. The single word transformed everything. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Some guests cheered openly. Others wiped discreet tears from their eyes. Even those who had once doubted Eleanor found themselves swept into the moment. Sebastian rose to his feet. For a brief instant they simply looked at one another. No titles. No expectations. Only two souls who had found in each other what neither believed still existed. Home. Months later, wedding bells rang across the countryside. The cathedral overflowed with flowers and candlelight. White roses lined the aisles. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in brilliant colors. Citizens gathered outside in enormous crowds, eager to glimpse the couple whose story had captured the nation's imagination. When Eleanor walked toward the altar, she no longer appeared as the frightened young woman who had fled a ballroom in shame. She walked with confidence, with grace, with the quiet strength forged through adversity. And when Sebastian saw her approaching, his expression revealed the same truth everyone else finally understood. He had not chosen her despite her scars. He had chosen her because of the strength they revealed. Years passed. As Duchess Hawthorne, Eleanor became beloved throughout the kingdom. She established schools for orphan girls, funded shelters for widows, and created opportunities for women who had been dismissed by society as she once had been. Wherever she traveled, people spoke not of her beauty or title, but of her compassion. Ashford Estate flourished once more. Its gardens bloomed brighter than ever. Its halls echoed with laughter again. The home lost through greed had been reclaimed through truth. And whenever visitors asked how such happiness had been achieved, the answer remained surprisingly simple. A cruel act meant to destroy a young woman had instead revealed her strength. A society determined to overlook her had forced one man to truly see her. And the Duke who first noticed a humiliated girl disappearing through a doorway ultimately gave her something far greater than a title, fortune, or grand estate. He gave her what every human heart secretly longs for: to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved completely. For in the end, the hot oil meant to scar Eleanor Ashford became the fire that illuminated her worth, and the love born from that moment transformed not only her destiny, but the hearts of all who witnessed it.